Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're breaking down one of the most important parts of JavaScript, function declarations versus function expressions. You'll learn what they are, how they differ, and how to use callbacks and arrow functions as well. Let's jump right in. In Visual Studio Code, I have a sandbox environment. I have essentially 9 examples that we're going to go through today. And we're going to first start with explaining what is a function. Well, a function is a block of code that you can run whenever you want. It helps you keep your code organized and reusable, and that's the benefit. And you can see that here we have a function of greet, and we want to console.log hello in the console. And so if we go ahead and say node sandbox 1, you will see hello. And the power of this is we can, run this as many times as we want. So we can run it 3 times if we want to. And you'll see the power of that. If we go back and run it, there's 3 hellos. So that is what a function is useful for. And you can, there's multiple different types of functions that you can use. One of the most common is going to be what's called a utility function. And that's essentially just a small helper function that does one specific job, like adding numbers. You're usually going to write that as a function declaration, which starts with the function word, followed by the name of the function, parentheses. Here we have some parameters, and we're using 2 and 4 as arguments in this function to then put back in the console what is a plus b. In this case, it'll be 6, and we can see that here. 6 in the console. So that is helper functions. Now, function declarations, to go into a bit more about that, is essentially using the function keyword and the function name. And we'll see that here in this next sandbox. And with a function declaration, what happens is these functions are hoisted, which means JavaScript moves them to the top so you can call them before their actual place in the code. And we'll see that here. We have a function of say hello. We're calling the function after, but we're also calling it before. And you'll notice if we run this, you will see hello from a function declaration twice, and there's no error message. And that's the benefit of a function declaration. It's, can be served as a utility. It can be reused. And if you want to, have something of that type of utility, you want to go ahead and use a function declaration because it has the benefit of being hoisted. Now, the other type is function expressions. And a function expression is when you create a function as part of an expression. You can think of it as a function declaration is standalone, and a function expression is when it's a part of something. So I think those are the 2 main key distinctions between both. And we can see that here. If we move on to the next example, we hop over to sandbox 4. And in sandbox 4, we see an example of a function expression. Typically, these are going to be assigned to a variable. In this case, we're seeing const say hi is assigned to a function, and then we're console.logging hi from a function expression. Now you'll notice that unlike a function declaration where we saw the 2 strings that we got back, if we run sandbox 4, you notice we'll get an error message. And that's because function expressions don't get hoisted to the top. They stay in their location, and we would have to only call a function after it's been, set up, been written on the page here. So if we go back here, sandbox 4, you'll now see hi from a function expression. Now, like I mentioned, it's most often assigned to a variable, but you'll also see something like an anonymous function passed directly as an argument. That also can be considered a function expression, and it can, it's essentially what's called a callback. And so here we have set timeout. We want to run a function within set timeout, and the function is being passed as, an argument, and we're essentially running a message in the console after 1 second. Set timeout takes in two parameters, 2 arguments, and one's the function, the next is the message, what's happening. And so we'll see that here. We go to sandbox 5, and you'll see after a second, we'll see the message runs after 1 second in the console. Now, a couple things I want to clarify. The first is that set timeout is a JavaScript defined function. It's, built into JavaScript, and it is, just part of what it is. It's built into part of the browser that we can use set timeout. So that is, not really considered a function expression or function direction. It's more just one of those built-in bonus features we have with using, JavaScript in the browser. So that's set timeout. Anonymous functions, typically you have functions assigned to variables, but it's not always the case. As you can see here, we have a callback function, an anonymous function being considered a function expression. Now, function expressions can also be written as arrow functions. So we're not going to get into too much detail about arrow functions now, but the main thing I want to get to is that a function expression can also be an arrow function. And you'll see that it's the same concept. It's a function which is, denoted by some parentheses followed by an equal sign and an arrow. And that's, the format of writing an arrow function. And you'll notice that it's assigned to a variable. So it's the same concept. When you have a standalone function with a name, it's going to be a function declaration. And if it's, part of a whole thing, then it's going to be a function expression. And that also I want to mention is that a named function can still be a function expression. If you had an anonymous function here, this anonymous function here, function console.log, if you were trying to run this just as a function declaration without a name, it won't work. We'll actually see an error message. And we can actually, take a look at that just to see how that works. So we can let's go back to the first one here. So we have this function greet. If we instead just went ahead and tried running, this wouldn't even work really. It wouldn't even be possible because there's no name to even call it. But whereas you can do a function expression with anonymous, you can't do the same for function declaration. And then on vice versa, you can't have a named function part of a function expression, if that, clears things up. Now, the next thing I want to go into is exactly that, named anonymous functions and why you might do that. And we can see let's go to the next one here. So we have, I was talking about named anonymous functions. You can have a named function in a function expression, but why would you use that? Oftentimes that's going to be used for what is called recursion. And recursion is a more, advanced topic for beginners, but it's essentially allowing you to reuse a function and call itself within a function. And we'll see that actually here with this little countdown. We have a variable assigned to a function that has a name. So it's a named function, and it is being called again later on here. Count n-1. So we're running it twice. And essentially we'll get into recursion in a later video, but the point I want to get to is that you can have named functions as part of a function expression versus function declarations are, completely different. And we'll see that here. And if we go ahead and we can say node sandbox 7, we will see 3, 2, 1 and done. And so with this, the main thing I just want to point out is, if you're seeing a named function as part of a function expression, this is going to be useful often for recursion, where the function calls itself as it's doing here. So this function count is calling itself again in order to make this all run. We'll get into recursion later on, but just wanted to mention that. I also want to touch on, what is a callback function? And I've kind of hinted at it earlier, and we can get right into it. A callback essentially is a function passed into another function that can be run later. So for example, in this set timeout we have here, we have an anonymous function that, we're using set timeout, which is that built-in function provided by the browser, or in this case, Node. It's, it's that bonus feature we get with JavaScript. And, once we wait a second, we run that callback function, which is essentially being passed as an argument. So here we have an arrow function. That is the callback. It's, in this case, an anonymous function expression, and it's given to set timeout. And so if we run this, we'll see that work. We will see arrow function callback, like so. So finally, the last thing I want to touch on, or the last couple things, is, we have, essentially, to recap, we have function declarations that are hoisted. And that's a benefit if, you have a utility function you want to use throughout all of your JavaScript. That's the benefit of, you can declare it once and then use it multiple times. And we will see that here. We have greet. If we run that, we will see that it works. So even though we're calling greet before it's even declared, it still works. So that's a benefit. Versus function expressions, which often are assigned to a variable, but not always, as we saw with anonymous functions. But we have const say hi, and this is a function expression. And if we try to do the same thing, we're going to get, and let's see here. Let's go ahead and console this out. And then if we clear this, if we run the same thing, you will notice that we get an error. It's saying you cannot access say before initialization, and that's what's happening here. You have previously in the past, before const and let, we had what's called a var variable, and that would be hoisted like we were seeing with these function declarations. But with var, it would be hoisted and initialized to undefined. So whereas, functions, you could run them and they'd work, variables with var would be hoisted and be initialized to undefined. Don't recommend using it. It's not recommended to use var anymore. Be sure to use let and const, but just wanted to, mention that. And that's pretty much everything. So recap, function declarations, they can be hoisted. Function expressions cannot. Function declarations cannot be anonymous. So they need to have that name, like I mentioned, and function expressions can be anonymous, vice versa. That's it. Now you have, overall a better understanding of function declarations and expressions and how they work, including also a little bit of touching on the topics of callbacks and arrow functions, which we will get into in future videos. So if you found this helpful, feel free to like, subscribe, and let me know what you're, interested in learning in JavaScript, and happy to, make a tutorial on it. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.